right, so welcome to the Geoeconomics Insight. My name is Kazuto Suzuki. I am currently in Sydney, Australia, and together with me is Hayley Channer, who is, are you research fellow? Or no?
Director, Economic Security.
Yeah, Director of
Not
Economic.
as senior as you, Sensei.
But she's one of the most prominent scholar in Australia about economic security. She is currently holding the position in the United States Study Center at the University of Sydney, and we are very luckily organizing together the meetings in Canberra, and we are just 3 days after the election. So today we are going to talk about the Australian election, which was to a certain extent a surprise election. So how do you summarize the outcome?
Yeah, it was a huge surprise because polling in Australia up until the election had said that the government, which is a Labor government, if it did get returned, it would be with a small minority, and they would have to negotiate with our Greens Party and our independents to form government. That's not what happened at all. In fact, Labor won an overwhelming majority. Right now, they're on 88 seats of 151 seat parliament. I think by the time people watch this, there'll probably be over 90 seats. But there's a number of things that make it significant.
Right.
The first is that this is the first time that a government that has been returned for a second term has been returned with more seats than the first time it was elected.
Yeah.
It's also significant because Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, he is the first Prime Minister in 20 years to have a second term. We've had a few Prime Ministers. And also the opposition leader lost his seat. It also looks like the leader of our Greens Party is going to lose his seat. So the polls got it completely wrong. Only one poll, a YouGov poll, showed that Labor would win in majority. So big outcome. Yeah.
So this is the very unusual, two consecutive Labour Party government, and Albanese continues being a prime minister for the next term. What is the reason of the Conservative coalition has lost? Well, by the way, this is a little bit tricky if you put the Canadian election into this picture, because in Canada, there are Conservatives and the Liberals. The Liberals are a center-left party, and the Conservatives is a center-right party. Here in Australia, Liberals are Conservative, and the Labor is the center-left. So the Liberals are the Conservative Party. So in order to avoid the confusion, we'll just say Conservative coalition. Yes. So why the Conservative coalition has lost significantly, and even the leader of the coalition, Mr. Dutton, has lost his seat. So what was the reason of this huge loss?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a question that Australians will be asking themselves, and the Liberal Party in particular will be asking itself for a very long time to come. I think there's several reasons. As you know, it's not always one reason. Firstly, I think they got their internal polling very wrong. Another reason, I think, is the major difference between the two parties this election was on energy policy. The Liberal coalition was promoting nuclear energy, small nuclear power plants, and there might have been some appetite in Australia to do that because the cost of living is high, the cost of electricity is high. However, there is a government science research organisation, CSIRO, that did modelling that said that nuclear would be too expensive and take too long. But I think the main problem with the Liberal Party's energy policy was they couldn't actually say how much of the energy mix would be made up by nuclear. And the Labor Party was continuing its message around renewable energy, wind and solar. I think another problem was the Liberal Party and the Liberal coalition didn't announce their policies until very late in the election. And by that time, people had mainly made up their minds. Even the Liberal budget wasn't released until a week before the election. And I think that globally, people want predictability when they see what President Trump is doing, when they see two world wars, not world wars, but regional wars.
Yeah.
They want predictability. And for them, that would mean policies announced up front early, whereas this Liberal opposition party announced them quite late.
Right.
So there's a lot of factors. And I mean, just lastly, you know, because we have compulsory voting in Australia, you have the parties pushed to the middle.
Right.
And so often there's not a lot of difference between the two major parties, and you're trying to see where the differences lie. And this election, it was mainly on energy. Both parties tried to talk about cost of living, but in the end, the Labor Party had a consistent, strong message. Last point, there was a big sort of turning point in the election campaign that I feel. It was when the Liberal Party was pushing Australian public servants to return to the office, not work from home.
Right.
And they walked back that policy because it disproportionately affected women who have to care.
Yeah.
And walking back that policy so early in the election campaign made them look like they weren't prepared and they didn't have a strong message.
Right.
That, for me, is what lost it for them.
Yeah. Well, this, coming back to office policy is exactly what Mr. Trump has done it in the United States, and probably the conservative liberal coalition wanted to be like American politics. It seems that Mr. Dutton was just, mimicking or just following the Mr. Trump's footsteps. Bringing back the officials to the office and cutting the number of the federal workers. These are the kind of, of course, there are questions of the productivity in the government, and there were a lot of discussions in how to be more efficient. So I think in that discussion, Mr. Dutton has brought the Mr. Trump's idea to the Australian politics. To what extent this Trump influence? I mean, for example, if you compare to Canada, Canadian election was hugely influenced by the tariff policy, and of
becoming
course,
the 51st state.
Yeah, 51st state. Yes.
Nationalism, huge.
Yes, but in Australia, I think it's there is no immediate threat from tariff policy. Of course, 10% baseline or the other steel, aluminium. These are the things that affect on Australia, but Australia doesn't have the doesn't have a budget trade surpluses. Australia is a very few country where the United States have the trade surpluses. So I don't
Still
think,
didn't help us.
yeah, but do you think that is there any Trump effect on this election?
I love your question because I think Trump is kind of infiltrating politics globally because people around the world are observing what's happening in the United States, and it's either being, brought into that country or it's being rejected. I think you're right. It was completely rejected in Australia. You're right. Peter Dutton and his coalition were borrowing some policies. They would ask, do you feel better now than you felt 3 years ago? Because we have only 3-year terms. And he also he had the idea to create a Department of Government Efficiency. One of his Northern Territory candidates also had a sort of verbal slip when she said, make Australia great again. And when she was asked about it after the fact, she said she didn't even realise she had said that, which shows you how effective Trump's messaging is.
It goes to the unconscious level.
Yes. But sort of lastly on that, there was even a sort of breakaway minor party called the Trumpet of Patriots Party. And it was Trumpet of Patriots. And it received no seats. And it spent $24 million in the election. And that is a similar figure to what the Labor Party spent on the election and the Liberal Party spent on the election. So it got no seats for $24 million. I think that shows you that there was a rejection of Trump-like policies. And I think that there's probably more support for Trump policies in Australia than what the voting showed. But because of the timing of the Trump tariffs
Right.
And the sort of uncertainty and wrecking that Trump is perceived as doing, Australia rejected that in a period where the globe is really in uncertain waters. So,
Right.
yeah, big rejection of Trump.
Right. Okay. So it's not an economic, but I think it's more ideological, or just idea of following the Trump policy is not accepted in Australia.
That's right. Even the Prime Minister in his victory speech said we did this the Australian way.
Right.
So it was sort of emphasised even after the election.
Yeah. So I think in the world, the politics in all over the countries, all over the world, is now being much more, moving towards the anti-Trump, or at least, anti-Trump style policy. The next question I like to ask is that recently most of the elections are influenced by the SNS, the social network. And there are countries, where, like Romania, where the TikTok has huge influence on the election of the president. Do you see any effect on the social network or social media influencing this election?
That's another great question. And it's funny you should ask that question, because I don't even remember social media playing a role at all in this election. Our election was only 5 weeks, and it's funny because people tell me on the street that they only felt like the election was sort of a 1-week affair. There was hardly any advertising. Right. So there didn't seem to be a big social media campaign. I mean, I know that our Prime Minister did some podcasts. There was lots of traditional media, but I don't remember seeing strong social media campaigns. Maybe that's because I missed them, but also the election campaign felt so quick. And there seemed to be so much more emphasis on what was happening in the United States.
Yeah.
I mean, it still feels like there's a US election campaign happening. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Trump is still, doing the mass gathering and United States is permanently on the electoral campaign because of the midterm elections coming up and all that. So. Yeah. You are the expert on the economic security, and
you are the expert.
No, I just wanted to ask you. Of course, this is the continuation of the Albanese government, so I assume that there will be not much big changes of the policies. But do you think that this election has any give any momentum or any push for the Albanese to do more? I mean, especially under the current economic, the situation under Trump. Do you think that Mr. Albanese more encouraged to do economic security policy, or and especially in relation to Japan, more closer relationship with Japan? What will be the new government do?
What we've heard is that our Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, will stay in her position. She's very much focused and has been focused on Southeast Asia and Pacific Island nations.
Right.
But they don't neglect countries like Japan, the United States, the UK, traditional partners. I think that with a large mandate like they have, they should be taking more risks in economic security. So what that looks like is actually putting more government, some public money behind key initiatives that they're trying to do. For instance, I know this government is aware it needs to increase its gas production. So even though it talked about renewables in the election, it needs more gas to produce AI, and it needs more, cheaper electricity for things like mining critical minerals and processing critical minerals. My great hope is that this government will look at things like energy and critical minerals, and not just focus on what it is going to do domestically and what type of financial investment it's looking for from Japan, but that it will be looking at Japan and other countries, South Korea, Canada, the UK, Europe, to help provide trusted supply chains. Obviously, they should be doing that with the United States too, but I'd say it's too early to do that yet within Trump's term to start asking President Trump to join new groups. And that's why countries like Japan should be front and center of this returned government's foreign policy in key areas that are enduring issues that are going to be a problem for not just this government, but the next government. And essentially only Japan can be that partner, not just on things like energy and critical minerals, but reminding countries why the rules-based order is important and why it benefits the vast majority of countries in the world that aren't the US and China.
Exactly. And they are beneficiary from rule-based international order.
Exactly.
Probably this is the last question. And a follow-up question on that energy policy. Before the election, there was a assumption that the Labour will be a minority government, and therefore there has to be some sort of a coalition or support from the Greens. And but Greens has lost a lot of seats, and Labour has gained a supermajority, which means that there is not much pressure from the Greens. And does it mean that Australia come back to the traditional energy sources like gas, coal, or does this mean a sort of a retreat from the sort of an environmental policy and the economy becomes as a more priority? How do you see that?
Yeah, super interesting question. And I also learned so much from your questions because it's hearing what an outsider is seeing from my country. So on the Greens, the problem with the Greens is that people don't take them seriously. They don't have any defence policy, for instance. But in the past, people voted for Greens because neither of the two major parties were taking climate change seriously enough. Now the Greens are actually trying to evolve their party to be more of a housing party, like one of a renters party, because cost of houses in Australia is sky high. But I think that because the Greens didn't go harder on their environmental policy or have cut through, I think their leader didn't have cut through messaging. The votes that would have gone to Greens normally went to Labor instead. Because Labor has got these policies on tax credits for critical minerals, which are used in EVs, etc., and they're focused on wind and solar. So I think voters couldn't see what the benefit of the Greens, what their competitive advantage was. And then in terms of the broader question, what does it mean for Australia as a trajectory? I would say that the Australian government is recognising it's hamstrung itself through regulation and that it needs to fast track a lot of its approvals and permitting, that gas is a big part of the mix. In states like Victoria, there's strong opposition in that state to more gas mining. But I think that's got to change because there's no way we can do any of the industries or innovation of the future without more gas. At one point, we were told, homeowners were told, if you've got a gas stove, that's going to be phased out soon. And I love my gas stove and I don't want to let it go. But I just don't think Australia is going to be transitioning as much away from gas as what the initial projections were because of the cost of electricity and the fact you need to do that for a whole range of national security and cost of living reasons.
So it's been more realistic. I think the Albanese government, although it includes they become more serious on their climate change, but at the same time they are pursuing more realistic or pragmatic approaches, so that there are balances between the way in which to reduce the cost of living, but at the same time to promote the idea of critical minerals for the EVs, etc.
That's right. And I don't know if also your viewers will know this or not, but Australia is going to start buying US gas. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's because Australian gas is too expensive. So yeah, I think this policy space will change, and it will change in a way that benefits Japan.
By the way, Australia is the largest supplier of the gas to Japan, so we are buying a lot of expensive ones. But still, I think it is important to have a diversification, and this is what the economic security is all about. Even though you are paying extra prices, but still, diversification and having the trustworthy suppliers is quite important. So I think or even with or without this election, I think Australia is a very important ally for Japan, and I think as long as we consider the economic security in Japan, Australia is always the most important partner. So I think this election has, Australian people has chosen a continuity, and that is really well. I think it's a relief for Japan, and we can continue a good relationship.
I hope so too. And regardless of which government, the fact that we have a majority government means we can do things faster, and Japanese and Australian businesses can get faster answers.
Right.
So I'm really pleased about that, and I'm so glad about the relationship.
On that note, I'd like to thank Hayley Channer for doing this Geoeconomics Insight, and I hope that this will give the very good, clearer picture of how Australians see this election. So this will conclude our discussion on the Australian election as a special edition of the Geoeconomic Insight. So thank you very much for watching, and see you next time. Bye-bye.
But concluded that a treaty was unnecessary, or rather harmful, as dictatorships would not be part of it. The only way to counter malicious use of technology is with better technology.